just went through the T12, the trailing 12 statement. Now we'll jump over to the rent roll. So the rent roll is a report on going into details on the property and the tenants and the rent. So what we'll find in the rent roll is a list of all the tenants that are living in the property, what unit they're in, and how much they're paying in rent. So we'll be able to figure out a lot about the property in this rent roll. And when we look at rent rolls, we kind of want to look at them to kind of double check the T12 and the numbers that we have, and to understand how the property is running day one or right now. So rent roll pulls the information from that month or that day of their collections, who's a tenant right now, and what they're paying in rent, and so forth. And also goes into the when they moved in, when they're moving out. So when we're looking at this property, we're looking back in January, and so we got this rent roll, and it was very recent. It was the 18th of January. So we were kind of looking at it towards the end of January, beginning of February. And so this one, it was showing exactly how the property is running right now, which was really great. We could see how many vacancies there are right now, and potentially which ones are going to get filled, and how collections are. So now we'll dive in kind of to each line item here. So what you'll usually find in a rent roll is a unit. So the unit number, how they number each of their units. Then we'll see their unit type. This one is and they have different codes, so it can get a bit tricky at times. So we'll have to kind of dissect these. And this would be more of a 2-bedroom with an R behind it. It could mean renovated. It might not. That's something, each property is different by how they code the unit types. But my guess is this would be like a 2-bedroom unit. And it might be renovated with the R right there. It might mean that it's a renovated unit. However, I'm not sure. That's something you have to kind of dive in further to. Then we'll get the unit square footage. So we'll see how big each unit is. Then the resident. So this number is usually a resident code. This is for the property management company. This is how they keep track of their residents in their databases. They give them a code. So this is their tenant, and then the tenant number. Then usually their name will be right here. I took out all the names just for purposes of not needing to share that information with you. So I deleted all those, but usually their name, the tenant's name, will be in this column. The next one is market rent. So this market rent number isn't what they're currently charging, but it's what the property management company thinks that they could get for this unit. This would be their market rent for this unit. Next, they'll show kind of what they are charging, rent-wise and the amount. So with this unit, they're charging $1,200. Their market rent says $1,285, so it's showing that they have lost the lease of $85 with this one unit. Then it also kind of goes, they'll break down to see if they're paying for anything extra, like insurance. So they're buying renter's insurance through the property of $12, and then their total amount. Then there's the column of deposits, how much they deposited, any other deposits, the date they moved in. So we can see if they're potentially a long-term tenant, they've been there for a long time, or also when their lease is expiring. This is important to look at when we kind of do get the LOI accepted, and we're going to have to take into consideration of how many people are moving out while we are doing due diligence. And we need to be on top of that, so the property management company or the owner is filling those units and not just letting them stay vacant. That gives us more work to do if they do that. So we want to stay on top of that and know if any are moving out within the next couple months that they are being filled at the same time. So that's essentially all that is to a rent roll, is all that. Now we'll scroll down and look through. Now there's a lot of units here, 224. As we can see, like the unit types, they change. So this might be a 1-bedroom. This one might be a 3-bedroom. And they're different unit types as well, like a A1. There's an A2 here. Earlier we saw a B2. So they kind of change in that aspect as well, that you can note down and be able to pick apart this rent roll. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom because good rent rolls will have some good information on the bottom. But while we're scrolling through this, we can kind of pick out which ones are already vacant. That one, it'll show zeros across the board. So right here, we got a vacant one right here. That's what you're going to see when they're vacant units. Keep scrolling down to the bottom. In this particular rent roll, it actually gives us information on what there's future residents or applicants. So what units are maybe going to be vacant, but they already have other ones set up to rent out that space. So at the bottom here, we have a little summary of the information. They share us what the total square footage is, what the market rent would be for all the units, how much they are collecting right now or charging the tenants, security deposits, the number of units there are total and the occupancy amount. So at 92.85% right now in January. So this is great information to understand and to look at and to dissect here. Sometimes I will even, after I go through the T12 and underwrite it, I'll use a rent roll to check the numbers of the T12 and to also adjust so my numbers are more accurate. And by numbers I'm talking about our gross potential rent and our loss to lease and vacancy. Because the T12 will give you a vacancy of the past year. This is giving us the vacancy amount, how many units, which is 16 units, are currently vacant. That lets me know how the property is running right now instead of how the property is run the past year. In case there are any issues coming up right now, we can try to solve that or figure out what that problem is. Now I'm going to show you a little part that's, it's not necessary right now, but I want you to come back and watch this video after you go through some underwriting, the next videos, and learn how to underwrite some deals. Come back to this part and watch how I calculated some of these numbers to help in my underwriting when I want to hone down on the numbers. So here I'm going to bring out the gross potential rent, which is this market rent. This 216,000 is based on how much market rent is for 1 month. So we need to analyze that. So I'm going to equal sign, I'm going to select that cell, and then I'm going to times it by 12. So 2.6 million is the annual gross potential rent. So market, so let's do gross potential rent annualized. Next, I'm going to do the same for what's actually being collected, what we're actually receiving. However, we got to take this number, this 195,000 doesn't take into consideration the vacant units. Remember when we scrolled up and we saw some vacant units right here? It's 0, so it's not showing us how much they're actually, what they could be collecting. However, it does for the market rent. So the market rent's accounted for on vacant units, but the lease charges aren't. So we need to figure out how much we're losing in vacancy. Now the way to figure that out is I'm gonna select over here, is we take the market rent, and I'm gonna divide it by the total amount of units, 224 units. That's gonna show us the average amount of rent per unit. Now we can get more granular and we can actually go through each vacant unit, scroll through it and take this amount. So 1,090, 1,075, and we can add these up as we scroll through 855, 855, and we'll get a more accurate number. However, I'm just going to take an average for now because I don't want to spend that time going through that right now. So $967 per unit is the average amount of rent. Now I'm going to times that by the number of vacant units, which is 16. That gives me what vacancy is right now, this month, and now we're going to annualize that. So we're going to times that by 12. Now this number is important now to take into consideration. So we're going to take what we're getting collected right now, and we're going to add the 185,000 to it to figure out what the loss to lease is. So I'm going to multiply that by 12 to get the annualized amount, and then I'm going to add annualized vacancy to that. So this is our gross scheduled rent. 2.5 million is our gross scheduled rent. This is how much if all the units were filled, this is how much we should be receiving. I'm going to label that over here, gross scheduled rent. Then we're going to figure out what the loss to lease is now, which is going to be the gross potential rent minus the gross scheduled rent. So 64,000 is our loss to lease. Now, if you can recall from our last video in the T12, the loss to lease amount was 44,000. So here's $20,000 difference, and that's due to the fact that the property management company during the year reevaluated what market rents were and realized that there was a bigger difference in market rent and what they were charging their tenants. So that $64,000 is probably more accurate of what the loss to lease is. This is actually more beneficial than that 44,000. That's extra $20,000 that we could potentially be gaining or receiving more profits on, charging back to the tenants and raising their leases. That is all we need to know for the rent roll, is understand the vacancy, the current vacancy, 92%. So that's 16 units that are vacant, and what the loss to lease is right now, and also the gross potential rent. we'll use those numbers in the underwriting template that we're going to start going over in the next videos.